all right. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming to the 8:30 a.m. session today. Have we hacked into inclusivity yet? My name is Dr. Brian Gant.
And my name is Lamont Orange.
Just to give a quick, brief background about myself. Currently, I'm the Associate Dean of Technology at Maryville University, private school in St. Louis, Missouri, around 10,000 students or so. I'm responsible for cybersecurity, data analytics, software development, and management information systems under my purview. Prior to joining higher ed, I was in the federal government. I was a Secret Service agent for about 17 years. Conducted network intrusions, electronic crimes, and the like.
And a little background on myself. Currently, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Cyera. We are a cybersecurity company, and my responsibility is to secure the cybersecurity company and our customers. Prior to working for Cyera, I was also at another cybersecurity company, Netscope. I was their CISO as well, and I've been in various verticals as a Chief Information Security Officer and in Ernst & Young security practice as well from a cybersecurity leader. And the one thing that we start to look at is we hear a lot about diversity and inclusion, and I'll call them initiatives, and we'll hit on that as to why I don't believe an initiative is where it should be. But we talk about it, and we have these programs in place, but is it getting better? How do we hack this like we hack everything else in our life and make things work? Thinking outside of the box and turning the I wish they would do it into the they becomes us and making a path for inclusivity in our organizations to innovate.
Absolutely. It's about moving that discussion into action, right? And so hopefully this presentation today, you can have some takeaways that you can take back to your organizations, your companies, and let's go ahead and get started. So as a rule of housekeeping, when we get to the QA session and you have a question, if you would, we also like you to go to the microphone so that those online can hear the question and the rest of the room can hear the responses as well. So when we talk a little bit about defining this problem and having some of what I'll call the hacker mindset, when we're as cyber professionals, when we start to think about our red teaming and how we protect our organizations, we think about the path that a bad actor would try to exploit to get into our organizations. This is the same type of thing we should be looking at from how do we attack the inclusivity problem. We have to think about it. We have to get into that mindset. How do we do things that are not within the norm to get the outcome that we need to get for our organization? So as with everything else, you start to think, you start to put your ideas, you start to put your metrics and your outcomes in place, and you start to look at what tools you need to do it, whether those are human tools or whether we have to go get training for people, but you need to understand what pieces you need to make the puzzle work. All right, and so continuing with framing that problem, right? And this is the interactive portion of the presentation, right? So let's look at some diversity statistics when it comes to cybersecurity. So if I were to ask you what do you think the Hispanic representation is in a percentage in cybersecurity? What would you say? Somebody throw out a number. What do you think? 5%? 5%? Very, very close. Hispanic representation, 4% right now, right? What if I were to say the African American women percentage in cybersecurity? 0.5? Up. 3%. Okay? And then finally, as a whole in North America as a whole, what do you think the representation is for women? North America only as a whole. Ooh, you're really close. 14%. All right, so think about those statistics, right? Yet, despite those, employers are seeking to increase diversity, and it says here that more than 53% of hiring managers report that they prioritize hiring women in cybersecurity roles. All right, and so when we think about framing that problem, we see what the statistics say,
but yet we see that over half the hiring employers say this is a priority for us. So where's the breakdown? And hopefully we can have some of that discussion here in the next coming slides.
So when you think about planning, going back to my mindset comment, the tool that we need first is, do we understand what good looks like? Going back to and supporting some of these statistics, if it's the number one priority to hire women to be part of our organizations and teaching young ladies how to code and really diversifying our teams, do we know what good looks like? That's one of the things. Do we understand what our unconscious bias is? Unconscious bias is a funny thing. You know, we all grew up a certain way. We all have lots of experiences that we bring with us. And they're not bad. That's just our experiences. But are those experiences something that inhibit the growth within the organization? And I'll give you an example. When you look at, when I have a position, a job description out there, and you say you have a well-performing person in that organization, you say, I want somebody just like that person. Mm-hmm. Or I want somebody just like me in that organization. That's probably the right thing to do at the time, but when you think about what got our company here, what got our department here, what helps us to innovate, that's not what's going to keep us here, so we got to think different. We want all of those different diversities of experiences growing up, all those different diversity of experiences in the different parts and different segments of the workforce. And we also make cyber very, very hard. When I was in school and trying to get into computer science and cyber and understand it, and it was like, yo, you need to know math, you need to know how to do all this coding, you need to do all these things. And I was preparing myself to be in a hoodie in a dark room so I could code. That's what I really wanted to do. That was cyber to me. And when I found out there's other things I got to do, like speak, I was like, oh my God, really? So when you start to think about that, got to get out of our own biases. We got to make things simpler and lower the barrier to entry. Lowering the barrier to entry doesn't mean you settle for resources. It means you talk about it in a way that there's more opportunity for people, and that everybody doesn't have to go to school to be a rocket science to be in security or in any industry. The other things is our job descriptions correct. We need to get our HR teams really involved. In some cases, HR teams, you say, oh, the HR teams are involved, but we also need to train them. There's this list of things that are on these job descriptions. Can we find the unicorn? And most likely not. And if we do find the unicorn may cost us a lot of money, which impacts our budgets and things of that nature. And I like to say, through some of the other discussions that Dr. Gannon and I will have, we're going to talk about how to build your own unicorn. Mm-hmm. and really take the control of making your organization inclusive and really understanding what that really means, and not making it an initiative and making it more of something that's cultural.
So just continuing, with some other statistics around, the problem and what we're seeing, right? 23% of cybersecurity professionals are ethnic and racial minorities. And then finally, the organization's Women in Cybersecurity report also reveals that women occupy just 24% of cybersecurity positions, right? And so we, again, continue to see this problem. But we also have, there are a lot of benefits, again, to diversifying, their workforce. Improving risk management, right? Increasing the organization's agility, and then providing new perspectives while, reducing groupthink, right? And so when we think of cyber from a technical aspect, the strategy has always been a multi-layered approach, security approach to protecting our organization, right? And so why not go at it with the mindset of having, a multi-layered human approach to our human capital, our employees, right? And so again, it all goes back into how can we hack into this. All right, so inclusivity, all right? And I have a definition of inclusivity. Inclusion means that people across varying identities are and feel valued, welcome, respected, included, represented, and heard, and that they fully belong, can be authentic, and can contribute to the collective and have a voice. All right, and so a question I have for you all is, What does it mean to adopt inclusivity? And specifically, how do you marry the two, right, with cybersecurity? What does it mean to adopt inclusivity, and how do you marry the two to cybersecurity? Does anyone want to take a stab at it, at kind of what you think, just thoughts on it? Thank you.
That's right. He's our brave soul.
Right.
Thanks, folks. I don't think it's on, but. All right, checking. I think you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
We got you.
I think it's, this is something I'm very involved in at Blue Cross Blue Shield about how to sponsor the next generation of cyber talent. And I think it's surprisingly, it seems simple, but it's really complicated because it's more than just me. So I think it's about, one is opening one's mind up and realizing that, diverse talent, the thoughts of women, the thoughts of minorities, when you cook a meal, you need these bits and bobs to make it work, right? It can't just be bland because you're limiting what you're putting forth and not getting a whole holistic view. So I think that was the answer to the first question. Your second one was?
And how do you marry it to cybersecurity? But I think you've answered that as well.
Okay,
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Adopting it means, looking at the environment in which your employees are in and making sure that it's an open environment, right? And that those employees feel like they're really contributing toward the cybersecurity initiatives and that they're ultimately valued. And I think he correctly spoke on that. And that can be achieved through multiple things, right? I think Lamont talked about, our hiring practices, looking at job descriptions, right? Inclusive work culture, providing access to training, accessible training, right? Just by a show of hands, by a show of hands, the DEI training is just through some sort of CBT module or something like that. Yeah. What about something a little bit more intimate, interactive, maybe a class or something like that, an in-person class? Has anybody gotten to that point in terms of DEI training? Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so we want to move that line and move toward that. And a great example that I want to talk about when we look at forward and progressive inclusivity, right? We have an area in St. Louis. It's kind of an incubator startups. It's called Cortex. All right. I have an organization on my campus, a Women in Cybersecurity organization, one of the few in the Midwest. We actually have our vice president of that organization is actually Hispanic. Okay, I made it my decision to be intentional about setting up a booth, a tent at this STEM STL event that they had in this area, right? And we discussed all of those things. We discussed the Women in Cybersecurity Club. We discussed our involvement in career fairs and different organizations that we had partnered with at my school, and just the sheer amount of interest from that day and that community alone, I will probably, in my opinion, be able to reap benefits from that for years to come, whether it's additional students, whether it's additional exposure for my current students and the likes. And so those are the things when I talk about forward and progressive, being creative and thinking outside the box and being intentional with some of those different things.
I think the one thing that absolutely want to hit on that Dr. Gant spoke about was being intentional. Intentionality is the first statement and I think the first pillar of what we should strive to do to be inclusive, because we have to make a safe space where those ideas can be voiced. Every comment, every response is a good answer because we may learn from it and we come from different perspectives. But again, how do we turn all of that information gathering is where we're building up this mechanism where the action comes into place. But we always have to level set. And the level setting is, number one, we need to be intentional, first of all, from some of the things that we've done. When you talk about organizational inclusivity, that's another thing. You heard me talk about unconscious bias and giving some examples of that. But also, do we know what our biases are? Have we had that frank conversation to say, well, I don't need any more people like me and think like me in this organization. And if number one thing is to diversify and hire underrepresented or hire women and bring them into cybersecurity, well, what are we doing? I've had folks in the past say, well, I don't know where to find them. There's opportunity everywhere. There's community colleges, there's workforce programs, and we don't have budget. We always have budget. These things are free. You go and sign up. You say, hey, I'm in cybersecurity. I'm a project manager. I'm a finance person. I'm an IT person. Let's talk through, what are some of your aspirations? Where are the transferable skills? And it really, hits the nail on the head. I'll say, is it a resource problem or is it a skills problem? So we have to really think about this from an organizational perspective. And, do we have generational gaps and biases? I think are one of the more interesting things, because as I progress in my career and get a little bit more settled in my ways, I go back to, well, I didn't do it that way when I was younger. We did it this way. I want an office. No, I want a cube. I want a conference room. I want glass. I want sunlight. We have all of these different things that we have to think about, but we have to think about it in a way, how do we reach that next generation and not bring our own generational biases into place too? How do we settle those?
Yeah, and I think that first one really, really resonates with me. Do we have relatable role models in senior positions? And I take it as a professor, right? As a higher education professor, I do feel as though, as a black male, when I reach out to individual groups in the community, when they see me as a professor in their school, I think that says something. It says something about them eventually if they want to get into higher ed. And I think it's the same with cybersecurity. And we're going to talk a little bit about mentorship and sponsorship, right? He's both for me, all right? He's my fraternity brother, he's my mentor, and he's also my sponsor for RSA, right? And so, having those people in those positions, I think is very, very important.
And I think it's really about grabbing community. When you sit down and have these, going back to good communications is one of my number one bullet points. Let's make sure everybody understands what we're saying and not everybody's just nodding their head, We're not doing this to check boxes, we're doing this to actually be part of our culture. And when you talk about how do you put inclusivity into corporate goals, I've interviewed a few CEOs, various companies, sizes and everything, and I said, well, how do you deal with your resource shortage and your skills, and how do you bring inclusivity as part of your corporate goals? Because you say you believe this should be cultural as well, and the first thing they tell me, well, cultural goal is to be a good person and do the right thing. I said that's a great cultural goal, but it has nothing to do with inclusivity. It has to be more, again, intentionality to that when that perspective person is coming into the organization, you can tell them where you stand. And that way they understand they're not buried in a bullet point under a major heading of the organization, because that means we're serious at that point.
Yep. All right, let's move the conversation forward. Lamont, what do you think about cyber resourcing and cracking the code?
So this very good topic is near and dear to my heart as well. Resource challenge, skills challenge. I don't know where to find the resources. Where do you go? Is there a person, I've even had some recruiters come to me and say, is there a place where everybody hangs out? And I can give them a job description, and take up. I mean, it sounds really interesting to have that statement, but those are true statements where they're trying to figure out where are the populations of folks that would be interested in cyber. And I think we see it every day. We look at it every day. So we have to also talk about our partnerships and understand what those means, because partnerships gives us access to the next generation. And that starts in K through 12, that starts in higher ed, that starts in change of career. There's many folks that are looking at cyber as another way to change their social and economical status. If you're in cybersecurity and technology and some of those areas, you do tend to be in a good position for life to elevate yourself. Right. So we need to help them to understand that those are the opportunities and benefits too. If you're great with numbers and you're in finance, well, we need those type of people. You're great for project management, Great, we need those type of people. So you need to take those transferable skills and say, well, if you're good at numbers over here, you'll be great for an analyst. And I can teach you security. So some of this is looking for transferable skills and being able to get beyond our form biases and say, just because you're in accounting, you don't know anything about technology. That may be very true, but you do know how to analyze things, and that's what I need. I need you to find the needle in the haystack so that I can protect our organization. Or I need you to find the needle in the haystack so I can find some money for that training to promote my team.
So let's take a look at that first bullet, right? Resource and skills shortage. So the bullets you see here are reasons we think that occurs, right? Does any of these bullets resonate with anyone? Anyone care to elaborate? Sir?
All right.
Yeah, so I'm relatively new to the field. Before the pandemic, I was a comedian in New York City. So I've always thought of myself as, tech savvy, but trying to find jobs in the industry here, it's just acronym city. So, and there's a lot of discourse online about you don't really need those certifications to get started. Actually, you do. So it's very intimidating to try and sift through all that noise. For
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no blueprint to do all the things that we can do, right? The terminology and acronym, as you mentioned, definitely an intimidator. The job description one, I can definitely speak to that. As a former federal government employee, anyone ever apply on usajobs.gov to any positions? Very long, drawn out applications. The description can be very, very intimidating and very, very frustrating. I know a lot of different groups and people who started the app and never finished the app. So something just as simple as that literally takes away from our pipeline and our talent pool that we need to drive through. All right, and so I'm very, very good about telling my students, when you start the USA Jobs application, come to Dr. Gant's office. We're going to get through it. All right, and just because it says you need to have X, Y, and Z, don't worry about that. Don't get intimidated about that. They know that you're just graduating. You don't have 5 years of experience. Okay, so let's just push through it and let them make the decision.
Yeah, you have to still apply because, again, what's in that description is a unicorn. And I haven't seen a lot of rainbows lately, so I don't know if we're going to find that unicorn. So the other thing that really resonates with me on this list of transactional recruiting, because when I speak with a lot of talent acquisition team members, and they look to say, oh, well, where can I find these folks? And then when they do, say, oh, I went to a university or I went to a change of workforce, you get in here, well, I need to get like 8. I want to hire everybody that's in here that wants, to do this position and be in this career. Well, you're not setting them up for success. It's 50-50 at that point, right? So you don't go into the situation where you're checking the box. You also don't go into the position, don't go into it looking for a percentage of numbers too, because the percentages will drive us to do something really strange. And again, we haven't set folks up for success. And when you start to look at the impact numbers in your organization, you'll start to see all these attrition numbers and say, well, I guess that we're not right for them or they're not right for us, so we're going to keep doing what we were doing before. We didn't have those numbers, so we have to make sure that we're well thought out in how we execute this.
Right, absolutely. Let's take a look at that second slide, formed biases, right? What do you think of those, in terms of all these different biases?
So the informative biases are really interesting to me because that's the one that we talked about. It's the acronym soup. Is there a cyber glossary or a terminology and technology glossary that anybody knows about? Probably not. And just when you know about it for one reason or another, it's still wrong. And I'll use the titles as an example. CTO. What does that mean? When I was growing up, and I'll go back in my day, CTO meant Chief Technology Officer. Today, it means Chief Transformation Officer, Chief Talent Officer, the list goes on and on. Chief CPO, Chief Product Officer, Chief Platform Officer, Chief Privacy Officer. We're not original. And that's what it goes back to. We keep reusing our acronyms and reusing it, and we make it confusing. Again, going back to, if you can figure it out and you can, buy a vowel, then we'll hire you. That's not the right way to look at this. And that brings us into some of the selection biases components as well. Not the right way to look at it. More like me. More of my age group, more that think like me, more that look like me, more that doesn't look like me. We need to understand what are the outcomes, what are the measures and metrics that we want, and then how can we facilitate. Most of us, in some way, shape, or fashion, we have budgets. We have the opportunity to shape those budgets. So one thing I'll say around selection bias is, how many of your organizations say we want a program for new in career people? Just by a show of hands. Okay. How many of your organizations have made it easy to lower the barriers for new in career people to come into the organization and be successful? That's great. And that's about this percentage, when you look at it, that's about right. When you say that I want to hire those new in career people. And many of my colleagues and I, we wrestle with it, right? To say that, oh, yes, I want new and career people. They're going to have admin access. They're not paying attention. They can take the thing down. They can take the company down. We can have gaps. We can do all these other things. But how do we solve for that? And so, Dr. Gann, how do you think we go by solving some of that?
Yeah, well, one thing I do want to say before we move to that, the big thing I would take away from this slide is that cybersecurity risk can be reduced by reducing bias, right, in multiple different ways. Intelligent automation, taking away kind of that human element, helps reduce bias, right? Human mistakes result from a lack of real-time data and cognitive bias. So we can definitely, work on those things to reduce that bias. And here we have a graphical view of the bias interrupter, all right? Admiring the problem, interpreting the norms of basic business, and then looking at the metrics, iterative changes, and building change to basic business that perpetuate bias. And I think Lamont can speak to those iterative changes, which is very, very important, right? Small iterative changes. We're not trying to take the whole organization down, right? We're trying to build something into the culture and the fabric of the organization.
And when you apply that to being in an environment that will support, mentor, and sponsor new and career team members, or even existing members in your organization that want to move up in the organization, we have to break those barriers. And we talked, you heard me say earlier on, and speaking about it as an initiative, a DE&I initiative. Well, initiative has a beginning and an end. And that means we're going to really try big bang. We're going to do all of these things. We're going to get it done and run it like a project in 90 or 180 days. And we're going to be great. We'll be inclusive at that point. And what tends to happen is there's no way to carry it forward. So the key here is to be very iterative and then go back to our objectives and metrics and measures to make sure that we got the outcome that we need. And if we didn't, great, let's tweak it. And then document what that took to get that metric and keep it moving. We treat it like we treat every other project, every other program, every other cultural shift that we want to make in our organizations. Therefore, we start to do it unconsciously, and we don't have to have initiatives at that point. It becomes an objective, it becomes a measure, it becomes a shift in the community, shift in the company, just like anything else. And that's how we disrupt our bias, or interrupt, if you're a technology, interrupt it, like, IRQ, something old, another acronym. But that's what we would need to do.
So partnerships is one of the ways we can do that, all right? eradicating imposter syndrome. You know, we had a career changer right here, right? How does he go into this new field feeling confident about what he's trying to do? We have a lot of career changers in cyber, right? And we have enough jobs to fill those roles. So we have to be intentional about that. Again, making training more accessible, fostering diversity, and then finally those reimagined workspaces. And one great example I can give you of a reimagined workspace. The University of Texas San Antonio is an R1 institution in research for cybersecurity. They have some phenomenal things coming out of that institution. They actually have a building in downtown San Antonio where you have academia, you have industry, and you have students all in the same workplace working together. Whiteboards, open space everywhere. Right? Some of the most creative things in cyber come out of that building, right? So let's think about how we reimagine the workspaces in which we work at, and then the partnerships in which we forge. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about a partnership that we forged with his particular company and with my institution that is producing some great outcomes, and I think can be replicated and other organizations, other cities, and the like.
Yeah, you're starting to see movement within not only just University of Texas, Georgia Tech University is another one that has big real estate in downtown Atlanta where they're doing the same thing, academia, big business, and some of, number of Fortune 500 companies are starting to pour into these spaces to, again, influence the way and what we need from academia. So I think that's very important. I think the other thing that I would want to hit on this slide for you to take back to your organizations is training, making training more accessible. You've heard me say before, you probably say, I don't have the budget to do that. Well, I think there's a great opportunity when you start to talk through some of these partnerships. That we've all heard of co-ops. We've all heard of internships, right? So how do I do it? Well, I have to pay them. There are numerous grants out there that many of the universities are writing, and many of the change in workforce programs are writing today. They just need a company sponsor. They need a department. What that sponsor agrees to is to say that I will employ these young people, these change of career people, and I will give you the money to pay them. So it comes back to we do have budget. We just have to have time now to do something like that. You can go to an organization and say, I'll give a student or I'll give a change in workforce person a stipend. And then you have other programs that say, I'll match the stipend to meet the cost of living for you training that person and giving them on-the-job training, no strings attached. From my last information, I know of at least 7 states that have workforce as one of their number one, their 2030 plan, their 2035 plan, and their 2040 plan. So there are lots of budget dollars out there that doesn't cost the company any money. It just costs you time and to plant these seeds.
Right. And you have to be forward thinking, right? I've been throwing statistics at you all day, right? So I got another one for you. I'm a researcher. I got another one for you. By 2025, 50% of all employees will need reskilling. 50%. So if your organization, or upskilling, reskilling, if your organization isn't on that edge and thinking about that, then depending on what vertical you're in, you may come to some hurdles.
You'll have a skills problem for sure at that point.
All right, so we've kind of laid the foundation. We've talked about some statistics, things of that nature. We've talked about why inclusivity is important. Now, just like the title of the presentation, right? How do we hack? How do we hack inclusivity?
So I think Princeton University, another definition. The Princeton University Press, I think, really did a great job of talking through what it means to hack diversity. It reframes the questions of diverse advocacy to consider what interventions might appropriately broaden inclusion and participation in the hacking world and beyond. So 2 words in there that were very interesting to me: advocacy. You need advocates within the organization to say this is what we want to do. And then you need the appropriateness. So not going to big bang, what's appropriate for the organization to culturally adopt the shift of being a more inclusive environment. And inclusivity across all of the different dimensions that we've spoke about, whether it's new in workforce, whether it's gender related, whether it's ethnicity related. You have to have that framework for adopting that, and that you have those measures too. I think they did a great job of framing up that component.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this next slide speaks to, we'll go back one, some metrics that you can take back that you can get that advocacy, right? Looking at demographic diversity, hiring and recruitment practices, obviously retention rates, and then that cybersecurity performance and innovation. Those are some things that you can do right now to get that ally within your organization. Hold each other accountable, leadership accountable, very, very important.
And notice in the example metrics, you don't see percentages. You see impact, action. What's the diverse demographic of the organization? What's our hiring and recruitment practices? Retention rates. So you'll have a retention rate of those that are attracted to the company, a retention rate of those that are being promoted in the company, and a retention rate of those in that level of, say, steady leadership or different forms or different functions of the company. That's how you look at that to see, and again, understanding, do we know what good looks like? So now we have a measure there. And then innovation. Innovation is key. I interview a lot of young people for internships and placing them in my colleague consortium of other security officers. And one of the things that I'd say, going back to getting out of the generational biases, the young people want to know if you're an innovative company. And they look at that in a way, especially if you're in technology, and you say, we're innovating our company, we're putting more tech in, and we're reinventing ourselves. They want to see that. And if you walk around with a device from 1990, they'll tell you that, no, you're not innovative. You tell me I have to be in the office every day, you're not innovative anymore. You put me in a room with no windows, you're not innovative. And that's the feedback that I get, because you have put me back into the norms. So we have to reimagine what innovation looks like if we want to attract those that are expecting innovation. Right. And that generates that push and pull, where they're drawn to you, those candidates are drawn to you, and you are drawn to them.
Yep, and I think Lamont spoke to some of these earlier in the presentation, right? Start early, K through 12 partnerships. All right, I hold a cybersecurity summit every summer. Now I'm looking for a company to sponsor that. I have Girls Incorporated, I have Boys and Girls Club of America, and I have my own camp that I do just during the summer to try to get on the minds of young people. Scholarship and internship funding, I think there's a lot to be said about that. Professional development, and then again, retaining that key experience, looking at equitable pay, and gaps. So let's look at some of the success stories that we have. And so these are things that we have experienced ourselves that we feel like successfully hacked inclusivity.
So I'll start with a little bit of industry and higher education partnership. Dr. Gann and I, we created an opportunity for not only my team to be part of the they, to change things, and the first thing we did with that was, if we all have something that we can give to the young people in school about our perspectives and understanding cyber and demystifying it. So the way we started down that path was, I required my direct reports and their direct reports to become adjunct professors. And as they become adjunct professors, they can work in a position of a TA. They can also write the brief and the curriculum to create a class. And what we did, and with his partnership, we created a class in their cyber center of excellence that teaches young people about cloud security. And now we have a captive audience every year, every semester, I should say, of 15 to 20 students where they're being taught by professionals. They're learning some of the most innovative tooling out here, and they come out with a marketable skill, marketable certifications, look great for internships, look great for co-ops, look great for entry level. And now you're becoming part of that machine that you can be in a place where you can accept and make sure that they are entry level, are sponsored, mentored, and put in a position of success in your organizations.
So is your organization forwarded enough in terms of thinking, as he mentioned, to require the direct reports to do that? All right, and now, I have students leaving with a cloud security and virtualization certification, multiple different demographics. It's a waiting list for this class now, just because of that, right? And so, forging that partnership, very, very important. Apprenticeship programs, nonprofit organizations. I require a lot of my professors to sit on nonprofit organizations, on the boards, advisory boards, things of that nature. Some people say, well, how does that, you as a four-year institution, aren't you in competition with, nonprofit organizations who want individuals to go through apprenticeship? And I say, no, absolutely not. Cyberseek.org says that the St. Louis region has 11,000 open cybersecurity positions right now. I could have a 100% graduation rate. They could have cohorts of I don't know what, and we still wouldn't put a dent. Now, those are obviously entry-level and mid-level jobs, but there's enough to go around, right? And then I think that actually speaks to this last bullet. We have something in the St. Louis region called the Gateway Higher Education Cyber Consortium. So that is literally all of the cybersecurity educational departments, the heads of those departments. We actually all work together. We do not compete for students. We actually work together. We hold career fairs. We go to that area that I mentioned before, Cortex, and we talk to industry partners. We talk to startups. We apply jointly for NSF grants. We recently just applied for the Google Cybersecurity Clinic grant, which is a $1 million grant over 4 years. We actually do this all together because, again, of the 12 schools that are a part of that consortium, we could have 100% graduation rates and still not put a dent in the pipeline that we're needing. So I'm not sure if that exact thing can be replicated in your respective cities, but I would urge you to try to see if you can.
So the one thing I'll add to that within the Greater Higher Education Cyber Consortium is that it also takes leadership from the cyber leaders in the community. And in St. Louis, we have a St. Louis Innovation Group that are comprised of all cyber leaders, and we are informing higher ed what we are looking for and looking for them to teach. And also, again, offering up our time to become adjunct professors and teaching those young people exactly those marketable skills like cloud security, virtualization, network security. I'm an adjunct professor in Washington University, St. Louis, in their cybersecurity master's program. So I'm touching the master's students as well and the research students to say this is how and what we expect from you graduating, and also these are your positions and your track once you obtain this higher education degree, advanced level degree. So it's giving them and guiding them with that sponsorship, and it just takes time.
All right. So I believe it's 9:15. I want to thank you all for your attention. And again, if there's any questions, solutions, thoughts, or comments, we welcome them at this portion.
Can you go to the microphone if possible? Thank you.
So I think my comment is that, so thank you. Everything you've said, I'm doing for Blue Cross Blue Shield in the system. You know, we're a system of 33 independent companies. But a lot of what you're saying is very much cultural shift. It is difficult. You know, I'm not. That's not my job. I'm in cyber. From my perspective, I'm hiring, and you know, this is a big topic for us. But very much cultural shift doesn't happen easily. The two things that you said that really resonated that I wanted to just repeat was one. It's very difficult to boil the ocean on this topic. It's almost overwhelming because a lot of what you're talking about is not within me. It's within the DEIB folks, the HR folks, the other hiring managers that are all doing their own thing. But two things that really came up was be intentional, right? I actually have a job that two jobs that I've posted, and I'm hell bent on hiring minority women, right? And that's one thing I can do. And it's in my control, you know, being present, we control the present, not the past and the future. And I think by doing that, one important thing is there's got to be a domino effect from that, right? I'm going to do it. I'm going to hire that person. That person is going to be out there in the world, you know, badged like me, and then she has the opportunity to do more. So I think for those of us that it is overwhelming to think of this topic and how to make a difference. But I think the thing you said about be intentional is I can do all this stuff, and I do, and I try, but I do control that one hire or those two hires, and I can make a difference with those two. And by doing so, they can make a difference and be present, and you can see them, right, in my organization. So I think that's a big value prop for just do it, right? It's not like a Nike ad here, but that's I wanted to mention that because it is such a tricky topic.
Right.
Advocacy is very important. Thank you for the response. I say advocacy in what you're speaking is very important in that role because it does take HR and all of those other departments. And with that advocacy, I'll say one other thing. Celebrate our successes. We don't do a good enough job, I think, as sometimes as leaders of talking in the company about how we were able to move mountains.
And I think the misnomer, again, thank you for that. I think the misnomer about that is I'm not saying for you just to go hire a minority person for this position. No, I want you to hire a minority person for this position that is well qualified, right? And there are tons of well qualified people. So again, this is not a. I think we need to kind of move past the. There are plenty qualified people in you know, various different areas that can fill these positions.
Hi, my name is Rolanda Small, and I head up diversity, equity, and inclusion at Proofpoint. I also am the vice president of Cyversity.org, the Bay Area chapter. I would like to open up the dialogue here with your insights on the fact that tech moves on quarter-by-quarter results. And the work that we're talking about here is long, and it's going to be a long, hard push for us to see some of these results. If we start putting in the efforts when folks are in K through 12, then we go into college, we go through the mentoring, the hiring, all of that. But the tech space, especially in cybersecurity, is looking for results like yesterday. So what insights and how can we open up this dialogue together about what we can do to continue to help folks in leadership positions and in our organizations understand that us doing this work is not going to yield the outcomes they're looking for in one quarter?
Want to start?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So being in tech, and I've been in tech for quite some time, I definitely resonate with the idea of quarter by quarter. That's just how we measure ourselves. But I think if you take another measure of how we measure ourselves in that quarter by quarter, we're always looking through the next quarter. So when we start to talk to these leaders and everything, it's almost like it's a marketing initiative of demand gen. So we have to treat it into the language or the vernacular of the business that we understand. And that means partnerships are going to be key. You got to build that pipeline. And know that once we build that pipeline and we start manufacturing what we call the unicorns that we're looking for with these job descriptions, we know that once we get to the end stage of it, now we can start to disperse them. But we have to build it. And we're looking quarter ahead so that we know what our revenue results will be. And the revenue results in this is the human capital. That is our capital that we're looking for. We know what positions we need. and now we need to build them in this pipeline. And that takes time, but once we get the machine going, we can't cast them. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Carl Eric, and I want to share my story coming as a European university student. I'm about to finish my bachelor's degree in informatics, but I ended up in cybersecurity. So from my perspective, IT moves really quickly, and people don't know that it's changed so much throughout time. So in my first year, I started looking for an internship, and most of the companies turned me away, even though I was ready to be an intern. But because the companies just don't realize that with the advent of prompt engineering and generative AI, people learn so much faster and can adapt to new environments so much quicker. So they just look at the CVs, they're like, oh, he doesn't have experience, oh, he's first year, try again next year. They don't even try to give us a chance. So, and most of the people that happen to be given the chance to do like some work or go to like a, what's it called, an interview, they end up passing and getting more than appropriate results. So from my standpoint, I think you should give some entry of barrier, give them like some simple work to do, and if they pass, go to an interview. If they're, English is not my native language.
You're fine.
If they pass the personality review, you want to work with this person, and they show talent that they can improve faster, I'd say just give them a chance, and you'll be surprised.
That's an excellent
Thank you.
testimonial, I think, for you all. That's a perfect way to end, right? That's an excellent testimonial, I think, from somebody who's in the space that wants to get into the space, right? So, again, I thank you for you all's time.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.